In Part 1, we began the interview of Colour Sergeant Frank Bourne, leading up to his view from a distance of the British Army's disastrous defeat by the Zulu Army in southern Africa. Having had the warning, but only 2 hours in advance as it turned out, we set to work to loophole the two buildings, and to connect the front of the hospital with a stone cattle kraal by sacks of Indian corn and oats, and to draw up 2 Boer transport wagons to join the front of the commissariat stores with the back of the hospital. These proved excellent barricades, but by no means impregnable. When Lieutenant Chard of the Royal Engineers joined us, he approved of what we had done, but considered that our inner space was too big, and suggested a line of biscuit boxes. This was done and proved of great value later. I was instructed to post a man as lookouts in the hospital at the most vulnerable points, and to take out and command a line of skirmishers. The Colour Sergeant describes the sudden arrival and quick departure of the Natal Light Horse, plus how the Natal native contingent ran away, leaving the Redcoats alone to defend the station. We knew now that whatever might happen, we had to fight it out alone. And about 4:30, the enemy, from 500 to 600 strong, came in sight round the hill to our south, and driving my thin red line of skirmishers, made a rush at our south wall. They were met and held by a steady and deliberate fire for a short time, then, being reinforced by some hundreds, they made desperate and repeated attempts to break through our temporary defenses, but were repulsed time and again. To show their fearlessness and their contempt for the redcoats and small numbers, they tried to leap the parapet, and at times seized our bayonets, only to be shot down. Looking back, one cannot but admire their fanatical bravery. About 7 o'clock, they succeeded, after many attempts, in setting fire to the hospital. The small number we were able to spare defended it room by room, bringing out all the sick who could be moved before they retired. Privates Hook, R. Jones, W. Jones, and J. Williams were the last to leave, holding the door with the bayonet when all their ammunition was expended. The Victoria Cross was awarded to these men, and they fully deserved it. The Zulus had collected the rifles from the men who they had killed at Isandlwana, and had captured the ammunition from the mules which had stampeded and threw their loads, so our own arms were used against us. In fact, this was the cause of every one of our casualties, killed and wounded. And we should have suffered many more if the enemy had known how to use a rifle. There was hardly a man even wounded by an assegai, their principal weapon. There is a passage in the book The Washing of the Spears which describes how the Zulus were never trained to use those rifles, and they mistakenly believed that aiming high gave power to the bullets, which explains the inaccuracy of their snipers. The attack lasted from 4:30 p.m. on the 22nd to 4 a.m. on the 23rd, 12 exciting hours. And when daybreak occurred, the enemy was out of sight. About 7 o'clock they appeared again to the southwest. But help was at hand. Lord Chelmsford, with the other half of his original force, was only an hour's march away. On the previous afternoon, he had learned of the destruction of his camp at Isandlwana. A certain Commandant Lonsdale had chanced to ride back to the camp and had been fired at by Zulus wearing our men's uniform. He escaped by a miracle and was able to report the news to Lord Chelmsford. They got back to camp that night, but they found a grim and silent scene as they cautiously approached. The next day they resumed their march and appeared at Rorke's Drift, and our enemy retired. In his dispatch afterwards, Lord Chelmsford said, To our intense relief, the waving of hats was seen from the hastily erected entrenchments. And information soon reached me that the garrison had for 12 hours made the most gallant resistance I have ever heard of, against the determined attack of some 3,000 Zulus, 350 of whose dead bodies surrounded the post. Our losses were 17 killed and 9 wounded. Theirs 351 killed that we buried. Their wounded must have been 400 to 500, which they removed under the cover of night. There are two things which I think have made Rorke's Drift stand out so vividly after all these years. The first, that it took place on the same day as the terrible massacre at Isandlwana. And the second, that Natal was saved from being overrun by a savage and victorious foe. 7 Victoria Crosses were awarded to this one company of the regiment, which is now the South Wales Borderers. The Victoria Cross was also awarded to Lieutenant Chard, Royal Engineers, Surgeon Reynolds, and Corporal Sheese of the Natal Mounted Police. Lieutenants Chard and Bromhead and the men received the thanks of Parliament, the officers being promoted to the rank of Major. I was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, with an annuity of £10, the same awarded to the Victoria Cross. Now just one word for the men who fought that night. I was moving amongst them all the time, and not for one moment did they flinch. Their courage and their bravery cannot be expressed in words. For me they were an example of my soldiering days. The following year, Queen Victoria received at Windsor Castle a colour party of the regiment, and decorated the Queen's colour with a silver wreath of immortelles in memory of Lieutenants Melville and Coghill, for their devotion in trying to save the colours. On the 22nd of January, at Isandlwana, and for the noble defence of Rorke's Drift. You may have seen the famous picture of Rorke's Drift, painted by that great French artist, Alphonse de Neuville, and the original is in the officers' mess of the 2nd Battalion, now at Londonderry. Frank Bourne passed away in May 1945, one day after the Allied victory over Nazi Germany, and is buried in Beckenham Cemetery, near London. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel for new videos every week or two, and see the description below for a list of books, films, and online resources featured in this video.